So a little boy comes home very excited that he got a part in the school play. And his mother said to him, "That's fantastic. What part did you get?" And he said, "I got the part of the husband." And the mother said, "You go back to school and tell him you want a speaking part." The reason that's a funny joke is because the truth is the reason why husbands are always so quiet is because we're listening so carefully. See what I did there?
Yes, we do.
So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, may its memory remain for a blessing. Is that too soon for that joke? Could be. They're not the problem. They are a solution to the problem. The difficulty is that all of those social platforms are imperfect in their solution. Each and every one of those platforms is trying to help us get our story out, getting our voice heard. That's why I so rarely post. If you want to know what's going on in my life, come to any Saturday morning service. I'm talking about it. Or you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. You see, I have multiple outlets for telling my story, but not everyone does. Each of those platforms is about getting our story out. The flaw is we rarely find out if anyone is actually listening unless they like or love or laugh or dislike what we've said. But our world, each and every one of us, is in desperate need of being heard. And we wonder who's listening. We wonder if anyone is listening. Like so many on my Interfaith clergy trip to Israel this past May, I didn't want to go. It was a bad time of year. There was so much to do. As the year comes to a close, there are so many loose ends to tie up. I really didn't know anyone else who was going on the trip. I invited every member that is on the Bema today with me. They all said no. You.
I was already in Israel.
Yeah, you were already in, blah, blah, blah. And so Gareth actually pointed me to a friend of his that he had once heard of, once somewhere, somebody else's cousin's first removed, and we actually ended up going together, which was great. Yet the leaders of this trip were persistent in trying to get us all to come on board, and I decided that I would go because my daughter lives in Israel. It'd be a great opportunity for me to extend the trip a few days, and I'd be able to see her. And so I went. And as the lyrics of a great song from Fiddler on the Roof once said, "Wonders of wonders, miracles of miracles, God took Daniel once again, stood by his side, and miracles of miracles walked him through the lion's den." I can only do that because the cantor isn't here tonight. Contractually, I'm obligated not to sing when she's in the room. You see, I've been to Israel so many times, but this time was once again new for me. Each trip had its purpose. Each trip brought meaning, yet this time, I just didn't want to go. But as God instructed Abraham, "Go forth to the land, to the place I will show you," and so I went. I decided at very least I could show my non-Jewish clergy, my non-Jewish colleagues, the land that I love, the land, the people, the core of my identity. But what I found there on this trip was something far more profound. After 3 days of constant travel, waking early, visiting holy spaces, sitting on the bus, eating meals together, hearing from natives and pundits, we were given one night off. Each of us went in different directions, and about 3 hours later, we all found ourselves back at the hotel to have a nightcap together at the bar. And I asked Father Ashman, I asked the question that I asked Father Ashman when we first met 7 years ago. I asked my fellow clergy, can you tell me your calling story? The story about the moment in which you were called to the service of the Almighty. See, rabbis don't get called, right? Strange. We're the chosen people, but we make the choice to become clergy. For some of us, we can point to a moment in which we decided to go into this profession, but we would be hard-pressed to call that a calling. And that question sparked an evening of conversation unlike any I have had in my rabbinate. When you speak of the calling, it's really much more about listening, being able to hear a voice. And so for the next few hours, well into the night, we poured glass after glass, and each person shared a story of incredible intimacy. And I found myself more inspired, more motivated, more energized, more full of purpose than I have felt in years. It set for me a new, far more significant trajectory for my trip. And I was then able to see Israel in ways I had never seen it before in maybe 20 trips, including the year that I spent in Israel studying. It was different from the times I brought congregants or brought my family there. Sitting around telling stories about their calling taught me the power of listening. And for the rest of the trip, I was no longer a guide, even in my own mind, but an observer. I was no longer a rabbi, I was a student again, listening and learning, watching and feeling. The trip wasn't about what I had to offer, except in one way. I was able to be witness to a profound experience. I was not the instructor, but I certainly was learning. I was taught that the phrase, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha," love your neighbor as yourself, has something extraordinary to teach me. V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself, I was once taught really is all about first learning to love yourself. Because if you can love yourself, then you know what others might want. But that seems to me to be too self-absorbed. But it may be a clue to observing the principle that both Judaism and Christianity have so much to say about this proposition. There is a fundamental truth in love your neighbor as yourself. In order for us to create a more perfect world, we must see, we must hear, we must understand each other. In the Talmud, a story is told of a non-Jew. We heard it already. Came to Hillel and asked for him to teach the entirety of the Torah while he stood on one foot. And then he would concede to converting. And Hillel said, "What's hateful to you? Don't do to your neighbor." That's the entirety of the Torah. Can you imagine? We can boil it all down. The 5 books of Moses, the prophets, the writings, down to one phrase. Love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus goes even further in exploring that same statement. At the Sermon on the Mount, as recorded by Matthew, he teaches, "You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven." He causes his sun to rise and on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. So I continued on in this trip in Israel, and we found ourselves at the Mount of Beatitudes, a hill in northern Israel, in a spot that overlooks the Sea of Galilee, or in our tradition, it's known as the Yam Kinneret. It was a spectacular view. And there is a small but incredibly beautiful church with an amazing part of an original mosaic floor from Capernaum. It's a spot where Jesus is believed to have delivered his Sermon on the Mount. So after a few minutes of us walking around and kind of free wandering, we came together as a group. And Pastor Erwin Lee Trollinger of Calvary Baptist Church of White Plains began reading the words we have just heard from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they are called children of God. And the words of Jesus, delivered with the utmost of sincerity from the mouth of Pastor Erwin Lee Trollinger, were taught anew. It's about the other. Yes, those gifts will be returned to us, but they first must be directed to others. Strengthen others. Be merciful to others. Feed others. Be kind, righteous, peaceful to others. I thought the trip to Israel was about showing my land. It ended up about being able to hear someone else's story. I'm blessed because of what I witnessed. So, to conclude, I'd like to offer the following words of Amanda Gorman, a wonderful poet laureate in this country, a young woman who has extraordinary talent. And she wrote, "And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that's perfect. We are striving to form a union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first. We must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so that we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to no one and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say it's true that even as we grieved, we grew. That even as we hurt, we hoped. That even as we tired, we tried. That we will forever be tied together victorious. Not because we'll never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division." She said, we lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. How significant can that be in light of the events of Colorado Springs of this past week? We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. So I ask you, please reach out to the person sitting next to you and take their hand. And in doing so, make the promise to listen to their story. And let us say amen.